Hey everyone, today I'm sharing a story I came across on Reddit. It's not a made-up creepypasta. It's someone's real-life experience. And honestly, it's disturbing. Whether it's true or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But it really stuck with me.
If you like real horror stories like this, feel free to hit subscribe, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments what you think about it.
All right, let's get into it.
It all began about a year ago, though looking back now, it feels like a lifetime. Before the fear, before the world outside our windows started to burn, there was a quiet, ordinary day. A memory I cling to with everything I have left. I was with my wife Anya and our son Luke. We were deep in the woods not far from our home, the kind of perfect autumn afternoon that feels like a gift. I can still smell the damp earth, see the dappled sunlight breaking through the golden canopy. I can still hear Anya's laugh as she tried to catch a falling leaf. And Luke, he was in his element. He wasn't running or shouting like the other kids. He was just present, quietly observing. I watched him trace the bark of an old maple with his small fingers, his face filled with a serious curiosity. I remember a single, perfect leaf twirling down and landing in his hair. He just brushed it away, this tiny, insignificant moment of nature. I try to hold on to that memory, that version of him, because just a few hours later, that innocence was shattered forever. The end of things didn't come with a bang or a whisper. For us, it started with a leaf, a single impossible leaf trapped in the corner of my son's eye. The end of things didn't come with a bang or a whisper. For us, it started with a leaf, a single impossible leaf trapped in the corner of my son's eye. Don't touch it. The words left my mouth before I even thought them, low and urgent. Anya, not with your bare hands. My wife and I stood over him in the sterile afternoon light of the living room, a pair of helpless giants looming over our little boy. We tilted his face this way and that, the light catching on the impossible object. It was a sapling maple leaf, it seemed, nestled in the outer corner of his left eye. One half was folded over on itself, tucked neatly beneath his eyelid, as if it were placed there by design. How it had gotten there was a mystery that hung heavy and silent in the air between us. We were surrounded by maples, their broad leaves whispering against our windows in the breeze. But the idea that one could have accidentally worked itself so deep into our son's eye felt like a violation of reality itself. There was, of course, the chilling possibility that Luke, for some unfathomable, childish reason, had put it there himself. But that wasn't him. He wasn't that kind of kid. Luke was a serious boy, a quiet soul. 8 going on 80, Anya and I always said. And even now, he stood with a stoic patience that was profoundly unsettling, enduring our prodding as we argued over it. Doctor or tweezers? A sterile office or a home remedy? What if it scratches his cornea? I heard myself say, the words laced with a panic I was trying to suppress. He could go blind. Don't say that, Anya scolded, her voice sharp with her own fear. It's only at the edge. We can just pull it. She kept reaching for him, her fingers poised to pluck the leaf out, and each time I batted her hand away. A wave of absolute dread washed over me at the thought of her skin making contact with it. I couldn't explain the feeling, this primal, cellular-level warning that screamed danger. But I've learned to trust my hunches. They've never led me wrong. Tweezers, I said, my voice more firm than I felt. I'll get them. A steady hand is what we need. I hurried from the room, a new fear biting at me, that I couldn't trust Anya not to try it herself while I was gone. She was as stubborn as I was. Our entire marriage was a testament to 2 immovable objects learning to occupy the same space. When I returned, tweezers in hand, she immediately held out her palm for them. Now hold on, I said, pulling them back. I have the steadier grip. Anya opened her mouth to argue, but she was cut off by a small, clear voice. I want Dad to do it. It was Luke. He spoke with a calm finality, devoid of the tears or hysterics you'd expect from an 8-year-old in this situation. It was so out of place, so unnervingly mature, that for a fleeting moment, I wanted to turn and leave the room. It was only later, looking back, that I recognized the source of my unease. He was accepting this with the weary resignation of someone at the very end of their life, not the beginning. Holding the tweezers like a surgeon, I cupped the back of his head with my other hand, tilting him gently. I grasped the visible tip of the maple leaf and began to pull. It emerged slowly, damp and furled, slick with the residue of tears, but it didn't stop. The leaf gave way to something more, a slender twig, slick and disturbingly alive, and it just kept coming. I was drawing a living branch out from behind my son's eye. Lengths and lengths of it, a delicate strand of vegetation dripping with moisture, and with something dark, something red. Anya let out a shriek, a choked, guttural sound of pure horror. But I couldn't stop. I was trapped in a state of numb fascination, pulling and pulling, reeling this impossible thing from inside my son's head. And Luke didn't cry out. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, placid, his trust in me absolute, as I extracted this living thing from his body. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. I pictured him in the park, snapping off a branch and methodically, quietly, feeding it into his own eye. The image was so grotesque it made my stomach churn. But even then, a deeper, more terrible truth was beginning to dawn. A seed, a spore. It must have gotten in somehow, and in the warm, nutrient-rich darkness of his eye socket, it had started to grow. I was vaguely aware of Anya moving frantically behind me, but my focus was locked on the continuous, horrifying strand. Then, she was there, leaning over my shoulder, a pair of kitchen scissors glinting in her hand. With a desperate snip, she cut the twig as close to Luke's eye as she dared. The length of it fell to the carpet with a soft, wet thud. I jumped back as if from a snake, appalled, not wanting my clothes to even brush against it. "Luke," I gasped, "are you okay?" He blinked, a slow, difficult motion, the freshly cut stub of the twig catching on his upper eyelid. "I'm okay," he said, his voice eerily level. "I can't really feel it, not much anyway." I wished he would scream. I wished he would cry. I wished for anything other than this terrifying calm. He was silent all the way to the hospital, and silent through the scans and tests that followed. Anya sat beside him, clutching his hand as if afraid he might simply dematerialize if she let go. When they took him away for another test, she became a caged animal, pacing the waiting room until I had to physically take her by the shoulders and sit her down. Finally, we were ushered into a private office. The air inside felt heavy, suffocating. A nurse had given Luke a notepad and crayons, and he sat in a corner, completely absorbed in his doodling, oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening just feet away. The doctor, a man named Rylard, kept glancing at Luke with an unreadable expression that made my skin crawl. He was hiding something. "So," Anya began, her voice brittle, "the scans, the MRI, all of it. What is wrong with our son?" Dr. Rylard led us to the far wall, gesturing to a series of images pinned there. "You wanted to know how far the plant has grown?" he said, his voice a hushed undertone. "You assumed it started as a seed in his eye? Well, didn't it?" I demanded. "What else could it be?" But my eyes were already locked on the scans. It wasn't just a seed in his eye. It was everywhere. A ghostly, horrifying latticework, a web of white filigree woven through the gray landscape of his organs, tangled around his very bones. It was so prolific, so profoundly integrated. It was impossible to tell where it had begun. I'd seen old houses choked by ivy like that, the brickwork crumbling, strangled from within. Looking at the images of my son, I understood. This was happening to him. "There's nothing you can do?" I asked, the words a harsh whisper. "Surgery? Extraction?" Dr. Rylard slowly shook his head. "Removal is not an option. You can see, it's grown through his lungs, into his heart. The damage is already extensive. Any attempt to remove it would accelerate the process." Anya tore one of the images from the wall, her hand clenching it into a crumpled ball. "So you're telling us you're just going to let him die?" she hissed. her voice thick with venom and grief. Dr. Rylard sighed, his gaze flickering back to our oblivious son. I'm saying it's terminal, yes. We can discuss palliative care. What I can tell you, though I can't discuss specifics, is that surgery has been attempted in other cases. The survival rate is lower than low. The phrase hung in the air. Other cases? I asked, my blood running cold. There are other people with this? I looked it up. This is supposed to be impossible. Dr. Rylard began shuffling papers on his desk, a clear signal that our time was up. As I said, patient confidentiality. Anya slammed her hand on his desk. Stop, she commanded. You know what this is. How did it happen? His eyes darted around the room. A cornered animal. Mrs. Maxwell, I really can't. I want to go home now. The voice was Luke's, clear, decisive, and filled with an authority that silenced the room. We all turned to stare at him. He crossed the room and took his mother's hand, a gesture of comfort he hadn't made in years. Anya's hard facade crumbled. I saw her glance up at the fluorescent lights, fighting back tears. Okay, baby, she said softly. Okay, we'll go home. As they left, I lingered, staring down Dr. Rylard until he took a nervous step back. The way he's acting, I snapped. Is that like the others too? Calm? Like this is all perfectly fine? Something in the doctor's professional mask finally broke. He shook his head. No, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. They're not all like that. Some of them get angry. And believe me, that's a whole lot worse. In that moment, a pure, impotent rage filled me. I hated him. I hated him for his helplessness, for his secrets, for being the messenger of a fate I couldn't fight. Yeah, I said, the word tasting like ash. What's the point if there's nothing you can do? We walked across the hospital parking lot, Anya and I each holding one of Luke's hands, just like we used to. He was back to being a little boy, pointing out birds, unique cars, interesting stones on the ground, all with an easy fascination, completely unfazed by the twig that was, I could now see, already beginning to push its way out from his eye again. A part of me, the clinical, horrified part, wondered why it didn't hurt him. Was the plant releasing something, some chemical to pacify its host? I felt a desperate urge to ask him, to understand why he wasn't afraid of dying. But he seemed so fragile, so small. The grief was a physical weight in my chest, and all I could do was walk, nod, and pretend that every word he spoke didn't shatter my heart. That's when we saw the man, stumbling toward us from our right. At first, I thought he was homeless or drunk, but as he got closer, his head swiveling blindly in our direction, I saw it. Rose thorns. They were growing from his eyes, his nostrils, his mouth. Blood-red petals dripped from them like tears. He was stumbling because he couldn't see, abandoned in this concrete desert by people who must have been terrified. Anya gave a little gasp of shock, but Luke just stood still, watching the man with that same unnerving calm. Sir, I said, the need for normalcy, for kindness, overriding my fear. Sir, let me help you. The man flinched at my voice. He shuffled closer, and the doctor's words echoed in my mind. Some of them get angry. Sir, I repeated more cautiously, I just want to help. My son, he's like you. He has your condition. The man nodded. He opened his mouth to speak, and I saw his tongue had been split by the thorns. His words were a mangled, gurgling slur. It'll happen to all of us, he mumbled. It's catching. Anyone that's close gets it too. That's what they're saying. Out there. Anya was pulling Luke toward the car, her eyes wide with terror. Who's saying it? I called after the man. Out where? But he just bumbled on toward the hospital entrance, a tragic figure destined to be turned away again, to die on the street. The weeks that followed were a blur of feigned normalcy. We tried to keep Luke comfortable, a simple enough task since he seemed to feel no discomfort. He'd watch cartoons while we would have to trim back the new growth from his face day by day. One night, as we were tucking him in, he asked, "When I'm a tree, will you plant me in the yard so I can still be here with you?" The question knocked the wind out of me. I knelt by his bed, my eyes avoiding the maple leaf I could see flattened against the inside of his cheek. "You're not going to be a tree, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "We won't let that happen, all right?" He just looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. I know you can't fix me, Dad. Honey, come here, Anya said, tugging at my arm. I'm not going to let anything hurt you, Lukey, I insisted, my promise feeling hollow even as I said it. Anya pulled me out into the hall. Night, baby, she called back to him, her voice miraculously steady. Downstairs, she turned to me. You can't say things like that to him. Why not? I protested. I mean it. You know the doctor was right, she said, her voice cracking. You see what's happening, and he sees it too, no matter how much we try to hide it. By then, we knew what the man in the parking lot meant. We became addicts of the apocalypse, mainlining dread from every screen. The news was a constant flickering horror show. It began in rural areas with people who worked the land. Their families told the same story. A small injury, a cut or a scrape, and then the growth. Thorns, leaves, petals, pushing their way out. They became known as the wood. Some, in their final stages, simply walked into the fields and forests and stood there, willingly succumbing, believing they were becoming something new. The government came for their bodies. Others did not go quietly. Enraged, they vandalized the groves and orchards they blamed for their fate before taking their own lives, often by fire, determined to burn the invaders within them. No one knew how it spread. Touch? Airborne spores? It didn't matter. It crept from the countryside into the towns and cities. Scientists offered theories on talk shows, a coordinated attack by plant life, a new kind of parasite, even a radical form of human evolution. This last theory, proposed by a shunned biologist, was met with outrage and a fresh wave of violence. We watched on TV as mobs set fire to forests, the orange flames consuming everything, including the half-human figures screaming within them. Then came the rumors of a cure, a chemical sold on the streets. Snake oil, most said. But people were desperate. With society collapsing, vigilantes hunting the wood, and the rich hiding in bunkers, there was no one left to regulate anything. We tried to keep the chaos from Luke, but sometimes I'd find him late at night, bathed in the blue glow of the television, watching the world burn, idly picking at the leaf that was once again pushing from his eye. One morning, he was gone. I searched the house, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He's not here, I told Anya. Where would he go? She asked, her voice trembling. But her eyes, like mine, were already fixed on the back door, standing open to the yard. We walked to it together, two condemned souls approaching the gallows, not wanting to see what we knew we would find. Anya let out a sound. It wasn't a scream. A scream would have been a mercy. This was a deep, guttural noise of a soul being torn in two. I staggered out into the yard, compelled by that morbid human need to witness the terrible thing, to confirm its reality. Luke, or what was left of him, knelt on the lawn. His small body was held upright by the trunk of a young maple that had grown up through his throat, his spine the stake that guided its path to the sun. His arms hung limply at his sides, and his eyes, I couldn't look at his eyes. I saw them without seeing, deliberately blurring my vision. While Anya wept against the doorframe, I walked with a dull, robotic purpose to the shed. I came back wearing thick gardening gloves, a spade clenched in my hand. What are you doing? Anya cried out. Burying him, I said flatly. The funeral homes won't take him. Sooner or later, the government will come for him, or the vigilantes. This is better. I gripped the handle of the spade, trying to see only a scarecrow, a doll, anything but my son. Alex, don't, Anya pleaded, her voice raw. Please, just leave him. This is what he wanted. No, I snapped, the sound sharp in the morning air. It's what that thing wanted. The thing that burrowed into his brain told him to die out here. Can't you see that? She just watched me, her eyes begging, and in the end, I couldn't do it. Not for her, but for myself. The thought of touching him, of digging into the earth around him, sickened me to my core. We left him there. The tree spread its branches through the long, quiet afternoons. I kept the blinds on that side of the house permanently closed. A month later, we were lying in bed, hollowed out by grief. I ran my hand over Anya's back and felt it. Something small, sharp, just under her right shoulder blade. I froze, a gasp catching in my throat. What's wrong? She asked, pulling back to look at me in the gloom. Nothing, I lied. Cramp. I'll just stretch it out. I went to the kitchen, shut the door, and opened my hand. It was a maple leaf. The first sign, it was in her. And if it was in her, it was in me. I leaned against the counter and finally broke, crying like a child for my lost son, my dying wife, and for myself. Until that moment, I hadn't understood how they didn't feel it. Now, with the knowledge, I could. Not as pain, but as a presence. A quiet, patient fullness spreading through my own body. A second circulatory system of sap and fiber, coiling through muscle, creeping toward the chambers of my brain. I could see how some surrendered to it. Anya would be one of them. She would go out to the yard and stand with him, letting the things that killed them grow together. But as I walked back into the bedroom and lay down in the dark, I knew I would not. I have seen my own reflection in the furious faces on the news. I have already learned where to find the men who sell the chemical cure. One day soon, I will inject myself, and I will inject Anya. I will pray that it works, and if it does not, then God forgive me. I will burn it all. I will burn the tree in the yard that is still feasting on the memory of my son. And then I will burn my wife and myself. The world may be ending in a quiet, creeping bloom of green, but I refuse to be part of that garden. I will go out in a blaze of fire and fury. I will go out angry. I will go out human, a husband, a father, until the very last spark.